Thank you all for joining us. I'll start with Kelly.
Hi,
Hi. So this is based in part on a novel by Jonathan Raymond, your longtime collaborator. But this is actually John's first novel from 2004, The Half-Life. So is this a project that's been on your mind for some time? I know that the film is quite different from the book.
Yeah, the film, it was the first thing I ever read at John's before we did Old Joy, and it's actually what led me to write him and ask him if he had any short stories. And sort of over the last decade, anytime we've been in between projects, we... Is that you, Ed? Sorry. I was saying that over the last, I read his book when it came out, The Half-Life, and over the last decade, anytime we're in between projects, before we start anything, we always go through this routine of how could we make The Half-Life. And the novel spans 40 years and a trip to China, and it's just so far out of my reaches for budgets I work on. So it happened again, and this time somehow we came up with the storyline of the milk, and actually Orion's character, King Lu, actually becomes a hybrid of two characters in the novel. And so as soon as we had the milk, it kind of was the doorway to us finding our way to be able to do it and then we, sort of at some point left the novel behind. And
How did the milk come about? There's no milk or cow in the novel.
No,
right?
There's no milk or in the, I can't remember how that came about. I'm sure John thought of it. In the novel, they take the oil from beaver glands and take it across the ocean. And so I think it started with this idea of, which isn't, I wanted to do a chase scene where people, it sounds ridiculous, but they were dressed like trees, and they'd be like running and then standing still, and then running through the forest and standing still. And so we were trying to have this chase scene, and because we saw these like beautiful native costumes of people that looked exactly like trees. And so it sort of started from these images, and then of course that didn't even end up in the story, but somehow milk came out of that. Stealing milk came out of that. Who could say? It's a weird process, right?
Since we have the actors here, I wanted you to say a little bit about casting them and working with them. I think that the film is so dependent on their relationship, on this sort of, rapport that develops between these two men, and which is, as in many of your films, emerges, sometimes without words and through gesture. And so, looking for these two actors, and it's interesting that you said King Lu's character. The two friends in the novel were American, right? So
yeah.
the decision to make one of them Chinese and an immigrant. So.
Yeah, he meets King Lu in prison
right.
when he's in China, and then so. To make King Lu come in early.
Right.
The first one is.
Yeah, but can you talk about looking for these two? Was it a process of looking for a pair, or did you find one of them first? Or?
Well, John Raymond would like to take credit for discovering John Magaro's whole career, because he. What did he? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because he cast him. For, what was it for?
When I was a young actor, when you first move here, you end up doing commercials. So I did some commercials, and I did this the short-lived game Rock Band. Do you guys remember that game? Fun game. I used to sit in Best Buy and play that when I was unemployed. So I'm unemployed now. I might do that again. But John wrote. Or he just knew someone. He was somehow associated with. Yeah, he was somehow associated with this commercial campaign when Rock Band first came out, and he was like, "That guy could play Cookie." Totally unrelated. No, that's not what it was. But he knew me from that.
Maybe Trey was in charge of casting. Anyway, John would like us to spin this into a story of how he discovered John Magaro.
It wasn't a very good story I told.
But
sorry.
I knew John from Carol, the Todd Haynes film, obviously, and and we Skyped, and I thought he looked like a Courbet painting, and the search for King Lu was difficult and long, and really a lot of it, and it was really good fortune, has a lot to do with it, and Orion's willingness to work with me long distance, but you really don't know what the chemistry between two people is going to be until they're standing before you. And the first day they met and got into their costumes, and we sent them off on a camping trip with a survivalist for them to learn some things. And you hope they come back with some chemistry between each other, which they did. And but it's unfolding as you're making the movie, so.
What was that trip like?
It was fun. We learned a lot of different things. We learned how to make reed rope, and we started fires safely. And the oyster shell candle, we made an oyster shell candle, if anybody spotted that in the movie, in like one corner.
Yeah, well, Kelly, I always like doing things like that where you get to sort of, and also especially since we didn't know each other, it was a chance for us to get to know each other away from everyone else. And Kelly had told me that Meeks, you guys did some sort of like living frontier life for a few days kind of thing. And it sounded appealing to me to do that because there's a lot of skills in this that living in this world we just don't know. So they found a guy who lives in Idaho. And he does, frontier reenactments. And he took us out to the Oregon woods, and we sort of started taking on our roles. I would cook, and you would forage, and you skinned a muskrat and stuff like that. So there was a lot of like little things we did just to kind of get the sense of that world. I cooked the clafouti in a thing, and I cooked the biscuits. We made a fire without matches. So did all that stuff. But more than all that, I think it was just important for us to get to know each other and get a rhythm with each other as we were going into shooting like the next day. So it was good for that.
It was also interesting to learn about the fact that, like, back then, you're always busy preparing for the next thing. Like, just the process of making fire requires you to pre-pack tinder and make sure that it's dry, and everything has to be like pre-prepared, and they're always preparing for the next time period so that you've got enough food, so you've got fire, so you've got shelter, as opposed to today when we just pop down to the local market and buy food.
Kelly, can you talk a bit about the historical research that went into sort of bringing this early 19th century world to life?
Yeah, we sort of had to cram because I had been working on another movie for a while that sort of unraveled, and but it was in the same time period, fortunately, but it was in Europe. So suddenly we were, but we've done some of this research before. Meeks was 1845, and this was 1820, which made it more challenging because there just were not photographs to work off of. A big breakthrough from us was a confederation of tribes called the Grand Ronde was opened its library to us, and eventually started helping us, making available to us, some, we eventually met our language person through them, and helping us with the language and with research in the area, and then it just sort of goes from there, meeting people, kind of every department's doing their own research, and April Napier, who did the costumes, met the women who made all the cedar capes and hats, and they had family stories, and then that led us to, you know, there's a canoe museum in Portland, and that led us to some other people who had relatives that, you know, so it was sort of this, it felt really fast in one way, but also kind of, a lot of it just has so much to do with going out and just in meeting people that still have some thread of, you know, I mean, the area was pretty wiped out pretty quickly of the Chinook, so the area where we filmed in the, what was called the Lower Columbia District. And so, yeah, a lot of, we ended up working with a researcher in England, because that's where a lot of the information was brought back to. Like the Oregon Museum Society doesn't really have that much information of that period. So it felt kind of like the area felt like a little bit of a black hole, you know, Washington and California being better researched. And so, yeah, we were all the way through the shooting, cramming all of us, and you know, every location scout was a share of information. And
you've often talked about having like, you know, visual reference points for your films that often actually don't come from cinema. I think you've talked about like Robert Adams or Milton Avery, and so did you have painters or photographers you were thinking of for this film?
Not so much photography. Well, I'd been studying these sort of, or looking at the images of these 19th century French painters for this other film that didn't happen, which was also in villages and stuff. And I think some of that, because I'd been looking at those images for years, maybe some of that bled in. But one painter we all had in mind for our more overall tones and colors of the film was Frederick Remington, sort of the cowboy, American cowboy painter. And so he was sort of our, with Chris Blauvelt, the cinematographer, our kind of guiding light. And Tony Gasparo, the production designer, and April Napier also, we all sort of embraced him. And then I had been looking oddly at Yugetsu a lot, and for some reason that film became really key. And the Apu trilogy, which I for some reason keep returning to all the time. But and some of the Woman in the Dunes, the structure of the cottage was kind of a combination of the Yugetsu cottage and the Women in the Dunes cottage, which I kind of cut up, and Tony Gasparo worked from that.
I noticed that the film is dedicated to Peter Hutton.
Yeah.
I guess this is the first film you've completed since we lost Peter.
Yeah.
Was he on your mind in some way?
Yeah, Peter's always on my mind. I think probably anyone that knows Peter. Peter Hutton, most people probably know him here, American landscape, is that how you would describe him maybe? As a landscape filmmaker. He, I worked at Bard College with him, and he became such a inspirational person in my life, and on so many levels, but as a filmmaker. And like, I didn't really need someone to tell me to slow down, but actually maybe I did even. I mean, and I really missed on this film being able to get his feedback. He was very, you know, like I remember with Night Moves, he was like, it's too much of a movie. And, you know, like you don't get the okay from Peter. It'd be quite crushing. But the opening shot is kind of an homage to Peter's filmmaking. And I think, he just really, I just miss being able to talk to him about life and film and cribbage and things, but he's, I mean, there's a good talk with Peter that still exists online, and if you never heard him talk about film or whatever, it's if you can find it on YouTube, it's really nice, yeah.
Okay, one last question for me, and then we'll open it up. Can we talk about the animals? which is sort of a
yeah.
recurring,
Yeah.
obviously important part of many of your films. Were there any particular animal challenges? Maybe the actors can talk about this too.
You love animals.
I love animals.
She loves animals. Well, it was nice to have dogs on set. You always tried to have dogs around. That was really
Yeah.
nice.
We ended up, it was the first time I ever worked with trained animals. And I trained dogs. I really didn't care for that. They were really like little treat machines, and you couldn't, the great thing about, well, they're looking for like the trainer all the time, and it excludes the actors. And
It's like trained actors too. That's why you want
What's
just
that?
real people instead of trained
Treats.
actors.
We work
Because we just
strictly with
want
treats.
praise
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
Um,
Tell us it was good.
Treats. So we ended up calling in friends' dogs, and which sometimes was crazy and sometimes worked out. But it was, that was a challenge, the trained dog thing, because you don't have a relationship with, they never just like roll in the mud or just do anything doggy. They just like, where's the treat? Where's the treat? So, but Evie, the cow, she really did need some training. They worked with her. They found her. First of all, like it was a casting, like with cow headshots, and we found Evie, and she was so beautiful. She also got cast because of her eyes. No, I always think of John and.
Well, she has great eyes. Those eyes are beautiful.
Yeah, those are good eyes. Anyway, Evie got cast, and then she had to learn how to be on that the ferry that the art department built, and and all of that. But she was a treat whore also, a little bit. But yeah, she was super sweet and much loved. Though not, Chris Blauvelt, he just never loses it. He's such a calm, positive person, except for when working with animals. He just can't. It's the only time he's just like, really, with the horses, with certain women, untrained large animals kind of are the breaking point. But she was very sweet. Yeah. And
She's a
they
mama
just,
now. She had a calf.
She has a calf named Cookie. But it adds just something. The idea of the animals when we're working is just, well, first of all, just having them around relieves everyone's stress, So there was like the crew, some crew people had animals also, and but in an ideal world, for me, like with actors, it keeps, it's just like giving actors chores to do. You're just like, somebody has to be doing something or responding to something, and just seems a great way to keep everything alive and something spontaneous and happening.
Okay, we'll take some questions. I think we have microphones. So we'll start here in the front.
Hey there, it was a great film. I just want to ask you about the coins and other trinkets. Were they from the actual period, or did you recreate them for the film?
Yeah, the shells that are dentilia, that was a main source of commerce. Like, commerce hasn't really been decided yet. What has value is kind of up to you. But the Chinook dealt in dentilia a lot, and in fact people would have tattoos on their arms, so you could just measure the size of the shell on your, so that was and then buttons, and it was all through things we read, though not that all our actual stuff was. I'm sure some stuff came from the pawn shop, but it was really, the trading was really undecided. The fort, if you worked for the fort, they gave you these sort of certificates of money. What do you call them? What do we call them, Orion? But anyway, script. Yeah, thanks. everything was just what you needed. And so that was kind of a early thing that really fascinated John Raymond and myself when we were working on the script, that whole idea of what has value. Yeah.
Here.
Does your love of animals have anything to do with the kind of food that we see mostly in the film, all the chanterelle and the blueberries and the things that they eat? Animals are not really, the milk, yes, but otherwise they seem to play a different
some
role.
squirrels. They have some squirrel stew, I think. But no, I hadn't really. It's just what's there, really, and what they would have been eating and scavenging around for, especially since Cookies was not like a very expert trapper. But I mean, the beaver trade, what they're trading a lot is beaver pelts, and the beaver is getting wiped out, which is what the chief factor's referring to, you know, that the beaver are forever. But in fact, they, like the buffalo, the beaver do get completely wiped out. But all that foraging, I think, is what they would have done to survive.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for an exquisite film.
Oh,
Your
thank
films
you.
are filled with love, and I think that everyone who sees them feels that love and appreciates it. I have a question about the ending of the film. There was one point very, very soon before the actual ending where the two of them wandered off into the woods. And I thought that that was going to be the ending. I wonder whether you'd ever considered having that be the ending, and what was gained, in your opinion, by not having that be the ending.
Wow, everything is process, right? Like these long processes. So I answer you as best I can, but everything's such an elongated. You know, we were in the idea of John's book in the beginning, which goes from contemporary times like the 80s into, and the book starts with these bones being found. And the investigation of the bones, which are thought to be Native American bones, is the politics over these bones is a huge thread that runs throughout the novel that we obviously did away with. But I did love the idea of seeing these bones be discovered in a contemporary time, and then going back and to find whose bones they were and what their story was. I don't think we ever went through a time of, are you talking about a happy ending? No, I mean, I guess them being together, the I've got you at the end seemed to be, and King Lou's decision to stay with his friend, and really, I think Orion's character has the biggest kind of, I hate to say, I don't really care about an character arc really, but I like his character arc, you know, just like I do, I don't really like that word, but I like that he comes to that I guess, not to overstate anything, but just in the times we live in, we're at this like incredible greed that's at hand, at the stake of everything, you know, where it's just like illness or something of just like at what cost, you know. And I loved this moment of King Lou, just the bag of stuff becoming a bag of stuff, and not to have more value than his friend. And I guess that's how that was played out. Yeah.
We have time for two more, so we'll take one in the very back, and then we'll come to you in front.
Hello. Thank you for a very sweet film. I probably had a really big smile on my face from start to finish. My question is regarding the score. I thought it seemed very reminiscent of that time period, but there's also a couple places where I felt it was kind of modern, and I was just wondering what was the process behind finding that?
I started with like a long search for music or sounds from the period, and which was a big question because where would those sounds be coming from? Would they be from Europe? Would they be from China? Where would they be Native American? Would they, like we tried, I was working with some historical music people, and everything made it seem like you'd put it in the film and suddenly it seemed like a film for the Smithsonian, or you know, Ken Burns presents the no, but it just it didn't. It always felt too heavy and too specific, and so William Tyler, who did the music, came to town and came to my editing room and just played to some scenes, and we just spent a few days doing that to see if that would make sense. And as soon as it sort of became its own thing outside of the period, it felt better to me, and otherwise it just felt too much of an underscoring of something that I didn't really want to do. So, yeah.
Okay, last question here. Yep.
Hi, congratulations on the film. I'm wondering if you can talk about the incorporation of the indigenous components, particularly the language, the use of that. And you seem to have danced around a lot of times talking about it not being too much a movie or trying to avoid the underscore taking over. There seems to be a hesitation to make something, for lack of a better word, conventional. I'm wondering if you can talk about your own sort of artistic choices to avoid making this a Dances with Wolves and actually making it slightly more esoteric rather than something more conventional.
I think some of what draws me to John Raymond's writing is that there is this ambiguity to things and an openness where I have to think about it. And I guess in the filmmaking, in his writing, it's usually in someone's head, and in the filmmaking, I'm trying to think of how could I get to that. How to get to ambiguity is actually harder sometimes than a path that's like more direct, and so I do want there to be an openness and and also just when you're dealing with the West, the tropes are so heavy and formed, and you know, coming at it is you know, it's funny because I teach this class at Bard where I'm trying to, where we use existing scenes, and I'm just trying to get across these just formal filmmaking, and I'll have a diverse class of students, and I realize like every film I'm showing's made from a white man, and it's a problem. And it's for myself too, like this language that's been handed to me, and I wanna question it, and I want to, and I have a respect for the form also, but I don't want to just like walk in some exact footprints that have been laid out for me. So I don't know, it's always a twist of it's always a sort of search in that. I forgot what the first part of your question. Oh, the language, yeah. The language, Orion got so good at the language, which was hard because we had to like pull him back because he was not supposed to be the best speaker. And do you want to talk about the language?
Actually, I kind of want to talk about the ambiguity thing. No,
Nobody
because
asked you about the ambiguity.
I know,
Me
right?
about the ambiguity thing. Orion is not. Go ahead. He's going to be down on ambiguity. Go on.
Kelly came to me on the second day of shooting and said that she said a whole bunch of things, but one of the things that stuck in my mind was especially was how she said at the end of the shooting day she likes to sort of exist in a space where she's not sure whether she's told the story or not, and I think that like she totally knows the story she wants to tell, but I think it reminded me of a voice teacher saying how far, when you're trying to figure out how far to speak to the audience, speak halfway. So, you know, this is me speaking all the way to you. And this is kind of me speaking halfway to you. And if you want to, you can listen. You can listen, or you can tune out, or you can think about something else, but you can choose to come in and listen to me. And I feel like that's where the ambiguity plays with Kelly. This is my opinion. Kelly didn't say this, but she allows the audience in with the ambiguity and it not being conventional. And yeah, it's one of the wonderful things about Kelly.
I'll just say that the, thank you, Orion. One of it's the Shinagawa is the language, and it's a hybrid of, it's like a trading language. And these actors were willing to learn it, and we had some people on the set that were in some scenes that spoke the language, but I was really impressed with, because it's kind of a lost language and that people are trying to keep alive, but there's not an ultimate, you know, I'm editing this language and I'm just like looking at it. It's a tough language, and I just can only hope we're in the ballpark with it, you know. But it was great seeing how, like, the crew, like the sound crew, who have the headsets on all the time and are listening, and because I just remember one night we were doing some wild lines in a van, and the script supervisor and the sound crew were all weighing in on the pronunciation of everything, and it was just great having people in the crew be able to start pick up the language. It was a very, one of the great things that happened on this film was the friends we met at the Grand Ronde, who are rightfully sort of stand backish in the beginning with us coming to them, and definitely everything in the film is on, you know, our responsibility. They, you know, but they, you know, they ended up coming and giving us the canoe out of their museum, and we're just such. They were, yeah, it was great. It was a really, you know, I mean, like, if you weren't, it was just like a beautiful thing that happened, just to have these new friends that were not laughing at us while we were trying to learn this really difficult language. And yeah, I think, but Orion kind of really, like, the trick was pulling him back from knowing it too well, I think, a bit. But all the actors helping each other with it was pretty great, so, yeah.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it up. Kelly, John, and Orion, thank you. Thanks for being here.